Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It's just a couple of days removed from the League Cup triumph, but it's Premiership action on the agenda again with a trip to Paisley to face St Mirren tomorrow night. We'll get to that shortly, but first off, as you can see, there's no Tony today, but you're still stuck with me, although thankfully I'm joined by Alison McConnell. How are we, Alison?
Very well, thank you. Setting the bar high there for
it. Since it was just me and Tony yesterday, why don't you tell us what you made of the final on Sunday yourself?
I thought Celtic done enough to win it. I thought they were very comfortable. I thought once again you saw a game though where maybe they dominate a lot of the ball without translating that into a more comfortable lead. I think it made for a more nervy last 10 minutes than it might have needed to be. I think had they taken some of the chances. But overall, I thought they'd done enough to win it. I thought they were the better team on the day, but I think you can't look at the game without talking about Kyogo and his contribution. I think the two goals were exquisite goals. I think he's a very talismanic figure now for Celtic. I think the energy that he brings and just a bit of quality that I think he brings is just, I think you can see the influence that it has on the team and the players round about him. I think Near Beaton referred to him as a magician after the game, and I think that just lends a belief to the team when he's on the pitch that here's somebody that really genuinely can create something out of nothing. And I thought that the second goal in particular, I thought both goals were excellent, but the second goal in particular, I mean, Hibs goalkeeper 6'7" to get that up and down again, it just was a extraordinary technique.
Chris Sutton, I think, referred to it, and there's no higher praise you could get it from actually, but Chris Sutton referred to it as Larsson-esque, the finish, and you wrote a piece yesterday. For some people, it might be too soon to put the two of them in the same sentence, but if you want to expand on it a wee bit, I don't think you were quite saying that he's as good as Larsson, just that there's similarities to be made in the way that he affects the team. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think what I meant when I said it was Larsson-esque, he's nowhere near that level of player yet. I mean, Henrik Larsson was 7 seasons at Celtic, and everyone knows the stamp that he left. I think Kyogo's been here. He's not even here 6 months yet. But what I did mean was just the talismanic qualities that he brings to Celtic. You can see that he's quite an inspirational figure when he's on the pitch. I think Celtic are a very different team when he's in and playing than they are without him. I'd say the same about I think Larsson was the same in terms of the influence and the belief that he brought. But I think it's remarkable that a player of his quality at 26 has come to Scotland and no one really knew anything about him. I think considering what he offers and the clear talent that he has, it's extraordinary that he hadn't been scouted anywhere else prior to his arrival in Glasgow.
Ange Postecoglou mentioned that in his post-match as well. He was saying, obviously, he himself had a bit of an unknown quantity to him in these shows, but Kyogo had that as well. But Ange pointed out he knew just how good he would be because he was on the receiving end of it over in Japan. There's also not only because he came back essentially early to play in the final, and as Ange said, Kyogo felt that kind of responsibility, but didn't even want to come off on Sunday. He'd obviously been agreed that if you're playing, you're not playing the full 90. But when Owen Moffat was stripped, Mikey Johnston had just sat down, like feeling a wee niggle. So Kyogo was pointing, saying, "No, take him off instead. I'm not coming off." And it kind of delayed the substitution by almost a full minute. Well, Ange tried to figure out what's happening here. Is he coming off or is he not coming off? And eventually he did take the two of them off actually, but it was good to see. And also Johnston, he bounced up right away when he realised Kyogo was trying to get him taken off instead, and that was good to see as well. But based on the fact, all this talk about Kyogo, it leads me to ask, given that Ange explicitly said after it that he wasn't fully fit, but he was just so eager to play in the final, does he start against St Mirren tomorrow night for you?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in some ways this game's now every bit as important as what Sunday's was. I think Rangers have a 7-point gap. I don't think Celtic can afford to drop any points. So had you to look at it over the piece, your automatic assumption is that game on January the 2nd is the biggest that Celtic face. But realistically, you can't afford to drop anything before you get there. So it's very much a cliche. I sound like a manager sitting here about one game at a time. But I think it's utterly crucial that Celtic take 3 points from St Mirren tomorrow night. And I know that they've been decimated by COVID issues. I think they'll feel pretty hard done by it, having to play, given how handicapped they are by the amount of people that they've got self-isolating. But I was at Ibrox on Saturday for work and watched a very young Dundee United team play with tremendous courage and fearlessness against strangers and in front of 50,000 people. And I think you have to be very wary about a game like that on a tight pitch and on a narrow pitch against a team who are still fighting really for every point, fighting and scrapping to get everything that they can. And it will be a game where they'll feel that there's very little to lose, that the expectancy is that Celtic come in and take the points. And I think on the back of such a high and in the back of celebrating the cup, I think it can be hard to come straight back into work and straight back down to your focus being on games. But I think this is a huge game for Celtic tomorrow night, and I think Kyogo will be involved in some capacity.
A couple of comments here. Tim Anon says it's now the most important game of the season. I think you could argue that will probably be applied to every game in the Premiership, if until when they catch up at the top, that kind of thing. And I can see the logic with that. You and Boy Martin as well here saying 3 massive games coming up before the Rangers game. A comment about Kyogo, probably shouldn't start him, but he might sneak onto the bus. That was a wee reference to what Ange says. When he was in the post-match, he says, I would like to have seen any of you try to stop him playing. Now, plenty of comments coming in here, and there's one actually saying maybe trust the other players, use Kyogo as a super sub. What do you think of that? Is that an option? Maybe
I think it is an option. I genuinely do. I genuinely do think it is an option. I think maybe some of that depends on who else is available. To be honest, I think I'm not sure what the prognosis was in James Forrest. I'm thinking if Forrest and Abada and Mikey Johnson were fit, it might be an option to leave him on the bench. And that way, if you are struggling to open the game up, you could maybe bring him on at the break or bring him on for the last half an hour or so. But I think he's such a crucial player to Celtic and how they play that I think you want him involved, but you also want to protect him for the bigger games, whilst creating the balance of knowing that you can't afford to drop points before you get to the Rangers game.
Aye, and I mean that's what Edwards just said here is basically it. I mean the team selection has been the key all season, because sometimes, well, most games there's, if ever, has there been an actual full complement of the squad available to Ange Postecoglou. And I think this one in particular, if Kyogo is to be on the bench at the start, then it's almost the inverse of the cup final, where it maybe gets 20 minutes rather than the 70. But you've still got to remember he is coming back from an injury. You still have to manage it in some way, whether it is taking him off earlier, whether it's keeping him off at the start and putting him on later on. But as we've seen in the comments here, where is it? 2 seconds. It is with Turnbull injured. You've got to remember Turnbull went off on Sunday as well, just to add to all the worries. Simon Thomas here saying Beaton will probably start. I think that probably will be the case, because he actually, I mean, I says to you and Tony in the lead up to the final, one of the 4 midfielders was going to miss out, and I felt it probably would be Beaton, and it was, albeit he ended up playing the majority of the game anyway. But he had been playing really well in the lead up to the final, so I felt it was probably hard. It was hard done by, but that's the breaks when the other 3 midfielders are Turnbull, who had played every game, Rogic, who was in the form of the season, and McGregor, who's the captain and the most influential midfielder. It was one of those things that I think Beaton was just unlucky. He was going to always be the one that missed out. But this is, if Turnbull is injured, so that's a chance for Beaton to get another prolonged run in the team, would you say?
Definitely, I would expect him to keep his place. I'd expect him to start against St Mirren. I thought he actually played very well at Hampden at the weekend. I thought he did a good game, Beaton, when he came on. I would agree with you. I think he has been playing well. I think he's got his head down and got on with it this season. He's played where he's been asked to play. He's come in and done a job whenever he has been asked. And yep, I think he'll start against St Mirren tomorrow night.
Speaking of St Mirren, you mentioned that you touched on it there, but they're on a 9-match winless run, so they are scraping and scrapping for every single point they can get. But they've also had a horrendous time of it with COVID, which you referenced there. They forced their training to be cancelled the other day. Some reports suggest they're only going to have 10 first teamers available, so the rest of the squad will be kids and as far as I'm aware, players that they've had to recall from loan spells. So I mean, should this game even be going ahead, Alison? Are we getting closer to the kind of postponements that we've heard about down south? Is there anything there in that, do you think?
I think you have to have a lot of sympathy for any team that finds himself in that predicament. And I think if the shoe was on the other foot and you were facing pretty big games, I think you would want a reprieve and you would be asking for a postponement. I think the Scottish League has form here for making games go ahead. I think St Mirren were hit pretty badly after the first lockdown. I remember one of the games last September, they're having to bring a goalkeeper in and an emergency loan goalkeeper in and introduce him in the dressing room before they went out to play. So I have to say, I think that's very difficult circumstances to ask teams to play in. I don't think anyone could really have a gripe if the games were postponed. I think they'll try and keep games going for as long as possible. I think they'll try, if you can get a team on the pitch, then I think the games will go ahead. But I think you would have to have sympathy given the circumstances around it. And I think sometimes what you have to remember too, when you get to teams like St Mirren, the players have partners who are out pretty much in day-to-day jobs, teachers and nurses and medical staff and dropping kids off at school. I think it's very, very easy to come into contact with COVID when you see what the rise in numbers are. So I think you could appreciate their predicament, and I think you have to feel a degree of sympathy for them.
No, I think I agree with that, and I wonder how. I mean, the joint response group has essentially said that they'll revisit it after the fixtures, basically the winter break. But I always wonder if that's maybe too long. There's a lot of fixtures between then and now. And obviously you just mentioned at the time of the year, I know they're meant to be testing players every day now, but it's not just the players, as you mentioned there. Families have got jobs, families do other things. It's not just the players themselves. England has seen quite a few postponements, more than quite a few postponements. So, I mean, we're not immune to it up here. It might very well might affect us in that way. As it stands, it's on though, and we'll continue to discuss it. And on that note, there's been a few comments here. I'm going to just hit you with a couple of the questions while they're there. Quite a hard one there. Where does McCarthy rate in our midfield options? Charlie McGarvey says not very highly, apparently, because we've not mentioned him once, I think is what he's getting at there.
I think it's difficult. I think the fact that he came in, he didn't look much fit. At first, he missed an awful lot of football. He's played very little football over the last couple of seasons. I think he looked off the pace when he first came into the Celtic team. I thought he looked off it. He looked leggy. I thought he's got better in the games that we've seen, but I think there are people in front of him at the minute.
I've kind of touched on this before, Tim, and on an injury to Joe Hart. Touch wood, it doesn't happen, but would it be every bit as bad as an injury to Kyogo? I would argue it probably would be, given the state of the goalkeeping position until Joe Hart took it over.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing with Joe Hart is leadership. I think you're seeing a dominant goalkeeper in that area of the pitch. I think you can see the difference that it makes when you contrast between now and last season. I think he has a fairly commanding presence. And I think you see that in the way he plays and the way that he interacts with his colleagues and his teammates. So the incident with Carl Starfelt, I put Ross County when he was making sure that he was going to not talk himself into more bother. But I think what you have is a very experienced goalkeeper who has every belief in his own ability, and he has the personality to get that across.
I've got one other topic which me and Tony didn't get to yesterday, which is Bernard Higgins. If you would like to discuss that a wee bit with me, Alison. I know that we don't tend to dwell on stuff like that too much on here, but I like to bring it up. We didn't get to it yesterday, me and Tony, because obviously it was amid all the cup excitement and stuff. But in the lead up to the final, just before kick-off, it was reported that Bernard Higgins will not be joining Celtic when he retires from Police Scotland at the end of the year. Just wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I think it would have been a hugely unpopular appointment. I think the breadth of protests against the appointment were difficult to ignore. I don't think they came only from the Green Brigade section. I think there was fairly widespread support about the appointment and about the feeling that maybe Bernard Higgins had been effectively the focal point for times when there had been heavy-handed police measures in place. There was a sense that he had been the police focal point for those incidents. What I would say is that I think what you have seen, and this is what comes with a winning team, is that there has been a sense of calm around Celtic that wasn't there last season. I think last season, amid the chaos and the constant consternation and the aggro, which comes again from not winning games and from falling behind in the league, you've not seen the same sense of frustration and anger. I think it would have been very much a self-inflicted wound from the club to bring in such an unpopular appointment at a time when there has been a tentative restoration of calmness and togetherness.
I've used the phrase a few times that why would they give themselves that headache more than anything else? That said, that announcement obviously followed fan protests, which had at that point entered their third month. Although for me, while I acknowledge the club couldn't necessarily name Bernard Higgins specifically in any sort of dialogue, the almost total silence from their side in regards to, as you said, it was never just the Green Brigade, which is something I've pointed out numerous times, but what to me was substantial fan mobilisation against it. I think the club's silence on it probably won't be forgotten about anytime soon, I would suggest.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt just now that there remains a chasm between the club support and the board. I think it fractured significantly last season. I don't think that's an easy solution even when you have a winning team. But what happens is when you have good performances and you're bringing in trophies and you're winning games, it's not your focal point. It's not what your concentration goes on. So I think it slides into the background in a way, even though it's still there. It's not the dominant aspect of the relationship between the club. When things aren't going well, I think that's hyped to the nth degree. I think that really does come into much sharper focus.
On the positive side, I think we can agree both things are going well. A cup final win in the bag. Back to Premiership business, where they've still got a 4-point gap to make up, but you would agree, I'm sure all the signs are positive from the players on the pitch and certainly the manager in the dugout as well. So on that note, I think we'll end it there today. We'll be back again tomorrow with a proper game preview, predicted lineups and all of that. Thanks very much everybody for your contributions. If you've watched on YouTube, if you click that subscribe button, would be much appreciated. Thanks Alison for your contribution as well, and we'll see you tomorrow.